St. Augustine's Contra Academicos, or Against the Academics, his earliest surviving writing, as well as his first writing after his commitment to following Jesus Christ, which is described in his Confessions. This took place in a garden in Milan, Italy, in 386 AD. This book is written in the same year at Cassiciacum, which is not far from Milan. Augustine retreats to Cassiciacum with some friends and some relatives, and here he rests, he studies, he thinks, he prays, and in general he begins a new life as a follower of Jesus. In the Contra Academicos, he studies epistemology more generally, but specifically he deals with the question of skepticism. The academics were a group of skeptical philosophers in the ancient world. They were the heirs of Plato's Academy, which is why they are called the academics. The history of the academics is interesting and complex, and one of the interesting things about Augustine's Contra Academicos is how he conveys and interprets that history. We'll get to that later. There are four major characters in this dialogue: Augustine himself, Lactantius and Trigetius, his two students, and Alypius, his friend. In Book 1 of Contra Academicos, Augustine manages a debate between Lactantius and Trigetius, his students. Lactantius takes the position that the academics are correct, and Trigetius opposes that position. Now, in taking the position that the academics are correct, Lactantius is defending Cicero. Cicero, the Roman philosopher, the Latin philosopher, had taken Greek philosophy and transmitted it to Rome. He had taken philosophy in the Greek language and transmitted it to the Latin language. He had translated some of the books of Plato, and he had written his own books in response to them, or his own versions of them, you might say. Plato wrote the Republic, Cicero wrote his own Republic, using Roman characters rather than Greek. So Cicero created Roman philosophy and Latin philosophy, and this status requires that he be taken seriously. But it does not require that he be agreed with by Augustine and his comrades. Lactantius does agree with Cicero on two or three important points. One of them is that skepticism is correct, that we cannot find the truth that we are seeking when we study philosophy. Another point is that we do not need to find this truth in order to be happy. We desire this truth and we seek it, but we can be content seeking it and not having it. In Book 2, this debate between Lactantius and Trigetius ends, but the debate over the nature of academic skepticism continues. Augustine now enters the dialogue, and he and Alypius take up most of the conversation. In Book 3, the academic skeptics are finally refuted. The refutation proceeds in several waves, and I hesitate even to call it a refutation. It's very complex, which will become clear in a moment. Briefly, there are a few objections to the academic claim that we do not need to assent to any knowledge, or that we cannot find knowledge. Against the idea that we cannot find knowledge, Augustine offers several instances of certainty, such as the truths of mathematics, the rules of logic, and this interesting principle that even if I were to be deceived about everything else, even if the way the world appears to me were all a deception, the fact that it appears to me to be a certain way would still be a certainty. There are some objections, some moral objections to the academic doctrine of non-assent, of acting on what is probable without giving your assent to it, something the academics articulated. Augustine objects to this on moral grounds, saying that it is necessary to assent to certain moral principles for society to function, such as the immorality of adultery, the immorality of murder, and so on. Now, skipping over some of the objections to academic skepticism, one of the most interesting moments in the overcoming of skepticism is the exposure of the skeptics as not really skeptics. You see, they inherited Plato's Academy, but they also inherited, well, maybe to be more precise, they fought with the Stoics over Plato's Academy. But according to Augustine, what they really inherited was Plato's teachings, Plato's notion of knowledge, of non-physical reality, standard Platonic teachings. And Augustine says the Stoics had invaded Plato's Academy, and they had taught a materialistic doctrine. And the heirs of Plato, who understood his non-physicalist, his immaterialist philosophy, had preserved it, but they had done so for the most part in secret. They had opposed the Stoics, but publicly they had done so as skeptics, using their skeptical arguments to undermine Stoicism. Secretly, though, they passed on the Platonic teachings from one philosopher to the next, all the way from Plato to Cicero. And so one of the objections to skepticism is that there were no skeptics. The skeptics were in fact Platonists. However, the most significant moment of the dialogue comes with the appeal to the doctrine of the incarnation, where Augustine explains that the skeptical position that human beings cannot find wisdom is completely undone by the fact that the God who is wisdom, or at least the second person of the Trinity, who is God, became a man and brought wisdom to us. This is the most dramatic and the most effective undermining of skepticism. So, Lactantius' notion that we can be happy without having what we desire is refuted. Even the skeptics do not really believe, but even Cicero believed that if you could achieve the wisdom they desired, and everyone who could should, there's no objection given by Cicero's own properly understood teaching to the common sense principle that if you want something and cannot have it, then you must be somewhat less happy than you would be otherwise. Perfect happiness does require satisfaction of desire. And that satisfaction of desire is possible because the wisdom we desire has come to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Thus, saith Augustine in the Contra, Academicos.